Welcome to EDO Breakthrough, the podcast where we tackle economic development challenges head on. From small towns to bustling cities, every place has its own hurdles to overcome. The EDO Breakthrough podcast creates an environment of collaboration, innovation, and understanding where we can share our real-life challenges and brainstorm solutions. I'm your host, Sandy Dubé, a certified economic developer and founder of PPR Strategies. Each week, we'll be welcoming a different, brilliant, place-based mind to talk through real-life economic development challenges that have been shared with us by you, our gracious listeners. I am super excited for my guest today. We have Alex Dadok. Did I say that right, Alex?
You got it.
Awesome. Of Alex Dadok Consulting. Alex and I met at a conference several months ago and wanted to, welcome you to the podcast today and see if you could introduce yourself to our audience.
Oh gosh, you're starting with the big questions.
Just gonna go in, just dive in, right?
Well, thank you, Sandy. First of all, it's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me onto the podcast. And I'm excited to talk with you today and to hear some about your background too, so we can have kind of a conversation, hopefully. Even though I'm not a podcast host, I'll try to do it as artfully as I can from my angle as well. So, so I'm Alex Dadok, and I have a fairly new consulting practice that is sort of the reason why we're here talking today. As an intro, by way, I'll say I grew up mostly in the Southeast and studied economic development. Got the chance to work internationally, and then in the Southeast on economic development, things like land use, transportation, infrastructure, and had the chance to also work in rural development. Attended law school, clerked, and then worked in the private sector, and then in a social enterprise spanning several states in Appalachia, which I'm sure we'll go into some of those things more. And then by way of being an executive and helping with that multi-state effort, working in Appalachia on community and economic development, I'm hoping to use the opportunity with this consulting firm to work with a number of organizations around the country where I can be useful in the world. That's a good goal to have, and it's the reason for this.
That is a beautiful goal to have. And yeah, I'd love to kind of dive at you. Yes, your experience is kind of all over the place. You've got such a resume, and I'm curious, what was that thing? What made you decide, I think I want to do some consulting on my own? Was there like one little tipping point that got you to start the company?
That's a nice question. And part of it, honestly, Sandy, was just believing in myself a little bit more. Part of it was also the fact that, Sandy, you've worked, I know, in organizations as well before founding your own and building your own successful organization. But I wanted to be a part of building something. And I felt like most consultants weren't doing that in the way that I wanted for a long time. And so part of, so I was in organizations. I was helping build up and lead eventually organizations. And I felt like that was the way to contribute. Part of doing this consulting work now is seeing a way that at least I can tell myself the story. And I think it's true. I don't think I'm just telling myself a story, that I can help build up organizations as a consultant. And that's related to the kind of practice I have, where that idea of your community, a more loved home, and building that up through that idea up, building communities up through the organization so that they work better to build up those communities. I can do that as a consultant, and I'm still building something, even though I'm not in the organizational, structure.
Yeah, you're right. I hope you find that it can be a lot of fun to be there at the table and be a part of the brainstorm, be a part of the implementation, to help other organizations and their growth and their support of community and their support of entrepreneurs or residents. is great, and being able to lend your expertise or share your perspective and experience, um, or some examples or some best practices or whatever it is, and to share that information and then step out and help somebody else. Let them kind of take it and run with it is
Yeah.
is a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I'm already finding that, and I even have fun when I'm proposing the projects.
Mm.
So, some of the times I'm in the stage where I've proposed a few projects recently, and I don't know if we're going to end up doing the work, but I'm excited about thinking about doing the work. And isn't that a good sign? I'd love to hear a little bit more about your background, Sandy. I know that we got a chance to cover it quickly, but you were also in organizational life. You stepped out on your own, and you've built a very successful enterprise that has a pretty unique angle around. At least it seems to me as sort of the outsider, but around this entering from the marketing angle, but then doing a lot more and continuing to expand your services. Can you talk a little bit more about your path as well?
You're so funny. And yes, you threatened to throw it back to me during this conversation, and I love it. So thank you.
I told you I'm going to
This
try
is
to be
good.
a podcast host for an hour. I'm going to like play the podcast host. Maybe I was meant to do it, Sandy, in
I think
another
so.
life. Like you don't. I've got a face for radio. I've always been told. So there's that.
No, this is so good. But yes, I started the business because honestly, probably more by accident, but also along the same lines as you. Somebody gave me planted the seed, gave me an idea, and when I knew that somebody else believed in me, then I started to believe in myself. And so that little bit of trust and faith is a beautiful blend. And yeah, so now 20 plus years later, here we sit. It was me, and it was never just me. Somebody said, "Oh, it was just you at the beginning." No, actually, it was never just me. I know that I had one other person at the beginning for years and years, and I don't know. I know my strengths and I know my weaknesses, and I've always needed to surround myself with somebody that balances me a little bit. And now I've got an amazing team, still small-ish in size, but feels huge for me. There are 8 of us now on the PPR team, and we get to work with, nonprofits, county, city government, regions, Main Street organizations, higher education, public school systems, in this economic development, workforce development, tourism, places, destinations. And it's awesome to figure out what their needs are and how we can support in a capacity perspective of either coming up with the idea to solve a problem or implementing the solution to the problem. And a lot of the organizations that we work with, their full-time staff could be one person, could be 10 or 15 people. It doesn't matter. It could be 100 people. It doesn't matter. Everybody has capacity challenges. Nobody has enough time or money to do everything that they want to do. And so it's just a matter of finding the right partner for us so that we can support them in some way.
Well, I really appreciate. I'm going to turn it back to you because you're the host. But I just want to say that I appreciate that. And for all you listeners out there, I think Sandy just hit the nail on the head with explaining about how that value add works. And I could just copy what you just said in a lot of ways and apply it to the practice that I'm trying to build. And the good thing is there's so much work out there to do in this world because we'll talk about that more, but just really endorse what you said about that help that someone can bring in for capacity. People ask, what kind of clients do you want, Alex? And it's just what you said, Sandy. It's less about the specific kind of client, and it's about finding that partner that recognizes the need in that moment and where you feel that you can be useful.
Yeah, that is truly a goal. Obviously, our company, we are in this economic development space, and so place-based organizations. But beyond that, we want somebody that wants to work with us. We want somebody
Yeah.
where we can be a real partner. And we'll often say, we're kind of like a cousin. We're not there at every Sunday dinner like the siblings would be,
Yeah.
but for every big holiday or, a celebration or a loss, we are there and we have your back. And, so figuring out how we can collaborate to create the best environment for your community, or encourage investment, or create a space for jobs for your residents, whatever that looks like. So
Yeah, I really like that. That's right. And that place based, it is important, right? So yeah. Anyway, back to you.
So tell me about, I guess prior to launching the company, you were executive vice president for an organization. And I'm curious what some of your past experiences, how they have shaped into who you are today, and the lens and the perspective that you can help communities with.
Yeah, no, thanks, Sandy. Is it okay if I go back a little bit further than
Sure.
the recent executive vice president? Because when you talk about shaping the experience, it's like who moves out to work with a network in Appalachia, right? That's not anyone. Also, so just to take it back a little bit and get the little bit longer version of who is Alex and why is he here. I actually started so Sandy, we have this in common. I started studying economic development in college. And even before that, I was interning with the Durham, North Carolina City County Planning, and I had a mentor, and I would go in once a week, and we'd talk about, city planning and politics and all the things, and it was this eye opening experience going to college and studying economic development in the international context, and then my career has really been a sort of a parallel track of regional development strategy, and then helping build up organizations. Again, was really wanted to be building something. And so that included getting the chance to work as a Fulbright scholar, studying how local leaders make decisions and how that affects local economic development decisions in an international but comparative context. A lot of the ideas are very similar to some of the things that we run across here in the United States. So we're all people, and it's a different language, but same ideas. And then coming back to work on that regional development in the Southeast. And one particular moment that made a big impression on me, Sandy, as a young person. So I was in my kind of early mid-20s. It's my first real job. And our organization, we were working on this, infrastructure advocacy, land use, trying to think about regional development. And they were going to build a major plant up in the coastal plain of South Carolina. And that's not a very wealthy area in these coastal plain. It's not the beach. It's interior. It's former agricultural, center, but now has had some economic decline. And our message was, hey, you don't need this big plant. Let's do something more sustainable with local businesses and local economic development and jobs. Well, that sounds really good, doesn't it? Sort of at an abstract level. But when we got there, we were all going to give our public comments. And there was a woman there who was my mother's age at the time. And she gave her public comments, and she was crying. There were tears streaming down her face as she gave these comments. And she said, we know that this plant is going to pollute this area. We know the jobs are going to go to out-of-state engineers. You know what? We're tired of watching our sons and daughters move to the cities where you live with good schools and good hospitals and lots of jobs. Where were you 15 years ago with this talk of alternatives? This is the best offer that's come to this community in a generation. And I had lived in Durham, North Carolina, New Haven, Connecticut, Charleston, South Carolina, cities with big universities and hospitals and nice jobs. And I thought, I've lived in Peru for almost a year, and I don't even know my own country. And, that's kind of a wake-up call for a coming of age, moment. And so I actually left that organization, and I went out and lived in deep Appalachian Tennessee. I lived with Methodist missionaries. I did not go as a missionary, but worked with a group called the Jubilee Project, and worked with local potato farmers on trying to add value-added products to their potato farming so they could sell to local schools. Then I moved out and worked for a season, volunteer, both of these, with a Native American reservation-based community group on the Coeur d'Alene Reservation in northern Idaho, and I wrote them an economic development plan. Um, and I learned about, like all the things that one hears. I saw those things and talked with people and learned about it, and it was very lonely, but also gave me a perspective on kind of reviewing my own assumptions about what happens in place-based development, for example, what we take for granted, what extra challenges there are in our country. And that's provided a really useful perspective for testing my own assumptions, which is at the core of my consulting practice, is about questioning our assumptions as organizations, for example, our approaches. And so I know this is a bit of a long-winded story, but I'll bring it on home now. But that episode was, key to making me the person I am today, I can say. That episode in those months. And a lot of good stories too about meeting amazing people in our big beautiful country, right? So I returned to North Carolina. I went to University of North Carolina School of Law. I loved law school. I decided not to be a lawyer, but I did clerk because I'd already committed on the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals out in Denver, Colorado, with an amazing judge, which is a really fun experience. And then I joined the private sector and I helped build up companies. I worked in renewable energy development, writing pro formas, financial statements, and business development on renewable energy, and then joined as a director of operations and helped build up a financial technology consulting company. So marketing, sales analytics. And then we had the 2016 election. And that brings us to today, actually, because that election and the way that we approached that, we have had another election recently. And at the time, there was just a lot of anger and disbelief at sort of those people who had voted for a certain candidate from places like Washington, D.C., where I was living. But I had lived out in those places and knew those people. And it was more complicated, we could say. The story of economic decline, the frustration, not saying that people aren't unkind to and cruel to others, right? But there's sort of a wide variety of ways that happens. And so wanting to be a part of a solution, to bring people together, to build something together is what got me to join FAHI, or interested to join FAHI. And then they fortunately offered me a position, and I was there eventually as executive vice president, which is, and while there, worked on a number of initiatives, from policy advocacy and to helping lead the organization, helping us go to market, and sort of our place in the ecosystem of organizations. And happy to talk about that in more detail. But I feel like I've been running on for a while. But that gives the sort of perspective of where did you come from and why are you doing this? It's all this has led up to wanting to be this person in the world that works on these issues and works with organizations, as you said, that want to work with someone like you or like me.
It's so interesting. I was thinking about these, a couple of things in what you said, this idea of regionalism and regional economic development strategy. And so I want to touch on that. But I first want to, you mentioned that you were reviewing your own assumptions, and I think assumptions, and I think, kind of our inherent biases from just not knowing another piece, or choosing to see the world through a particular lens. I'm curious of any advice that you have for our listeners, or just for me, on that idea of being super aware of some of the assumptions, or bias, or the kind of your approach to a community, and how you go about learning from a different lens, like kind of figuring out what you don't know.
Well, I think that's a nice question, and I'm not sure I have a clean answer, but I suspect that you and I have in common that we're curious about the world, and that's a great place to start. If you're sort of curious, then you start asking questions.
Yeah.
but we can get, all these organizations that you and I are working with are doing good work, but they're also in it day to day. And so, the ability to prioritize making that chance for them, because they're probably curious too. But can they take that space to step back? And sometimes they maybe someone can help facilitate that, like an outside person. But even if they're doing it, you know, on a retreat, on taking time every week, whatever the method is, um, you've got to have capacity to. And you've talked about capacity earlier, right? And so you've got to have your own capacity. And as a leader, one of the responsibilities that we have as leaders, right, is to put our money where our mouth is in terms of our priorities, right? So if we say we're going to take this organization up a level, then we've got to make time to think about how we're going to do that as just an initial matter. There's all these barriers that we could talk about that are beyond that initial matter. But that would be certainly a first piece of advice there. And the corollary maybe to that is that just because you're taking some time doesn't mean that you leader have to solve the issue in your community that you're faced with, or even in your organization, right? It doesn't mean that you are going to, right? It may mean bringing people together in your organization, in your community. I gave a talk for the North Carolina Economic Development Association in December, and I talked about the idea of capacity aligned strategically. And so that's CAS, right? It sort of sounds like what it is, but what's capacity, right? Capacity is the ability to tackle tough problems in an ecosystem, right? Like that's like whatever that, just the ability to do that. And then align strategically means that it might not be you doing it. It might mean that you cause someone else in the community to take that leadership role, or to pull people together, or that you're a partner with them. And so knowing that as leaders, we don't have to do it all, but maybe we can invest a small amount of time and cause much more to happen.
I love that. And it reminded me of, yes, I think we're always trying to make the time to have the space, to solve or think about kind of the big problems. And one of my coaches had recommended that I read a book. It's titled The Road Less Stupid. It's from Keith Cunningham. And this idea of setting aside thinking time to just sit down and workshop like one question and like kind of drill down and drill down and drill down, through that. I wish I could say that I have perfected this, or I do this every day, or I do this every week, but it's been very top of mind lately. And I guess I didn't realize how top of mind it was until your last comment there about, really kind of, it's okay to be in and to understand the problem, but sometimes we need to take a step back and look at it from the outside, or from just a different perspective.
Well, and I know, again, I'll step in for just a moment to ask you a question. So you are a leader of an organization. So I just have a sole proprietorship. I need partners as well. But you have some capacity in your organization, and you are a leader. And so you're dealing with some of these kinds of challenges as you're thinking about growing. And so you just mentioned one, but are there others that are top of mind for you in terms of challenges or just goals that you have that you're really excited about tackling, if you got a few extra hours in the week or something?
Mm-hmm. It's so funny. I have a colleague. She's our managing director of PPR Strategies, and we have a push pull, and so she will say to me, "Oh, Sandy, just put a pin in it for right this second. I can't. We can't take on one more thing. We don't have the capacity." But the end of 2024, she said, "I haven't said that to you in a little while. I feel like I'm you're stifling yourself, something is stifling you." And so she like gave me permission to just come at it. And I'm a big proponent of manifesting what we want. And so I I would have been able to manifest new ideas and things that we can do not only for ourselves, but ideas that we can pitch to a client because they might help or serve them. And um, yeah, so for me, I'm trying to build the team to have the capacity so that I can dream of the next big thing that we're going to do, or
Hmm.
while also empowering the team to come up with what could be the next big thing. To your point a minute ago, I don't not every great idea has to come from me. And it won't, just like, for the head of any organization, I would love it to just be creating a culture where people um, see a challenge or see an opportunity and can start to workshop an idea and then bring it to the team. And then we could collectively, you know, figure out if it's doable or not, or perfect it or refine it or realize that we're not ready for it yet, whatever it happens to be. So,
Well, no, thanks for that answer. And a number of things I could comment on, but one that I loved hearing about was talking about pitching where you think a client might, just that ability. I mean, that's what it takes. Like all these organizations that we're talking about, what we want is for us all to be able to think ahead, right? Like not be reactive, but to think ahead on things, to get in front of some of these big issues that are hitting us in community economic development, whether that's workforce housing or education or childcare or infrastructure and transportation or water and wastewater, right? There's all these things that have these long lead times. Succession planning and organizational culture would fit in there, right?
mhm,
And so the fact that you're talking about pitching to clients where you might think you might be able to offer a value add that they need, but they didn't really put the pieces together and
mhm,
know that they need it. And because you have these existing relationships, you know a little bit about them, or maybe even a lot about them, and you're able to add even more value. Um, and that's a great place to be as a consultant. And it's also, I think, what a lot of these organizations will benefit from having you with a little bit more capacity in your way than they do in their daily. Say, hey, have you thought about this? And again, if they don't need it, they're not going to contract you for it. But they might say, no, it was in the back of my mind, but until you brought it up, I didn't think about it as much. And now let's talk about this, and let's go a little bit deeper on this.
yeah, I've got this idea in my head, and I need to find the right community to pitch it to. But a community that is having some perception challenges. I've got an idea, particularly centered around visitor engagement and
Hmm.
in that space. So I'll tease it there for now, but it is fun, kind of when we travel and we come up with ideas that we want to bring back home, or when we travel, we get out of our comfort zone of like kind of the day-to-day grind and can be creative. I get every single idea when I'm in motion. I have to be walking to workshop an idea and have it pop into my head, so it's kind of fun.
That helps me too, and that kind of work that you're just teasing is work that I hope to do some of at some point. I think it sounds really interesting, like to the it's sort of like there's infrastructure of like a industrial park or housing or whatever, and then there's the community infrastructure of like community leadership and how do we feel about ourselves, and it culture of a community, and it makes such a difference in all these other things. So
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
it really does. It really does. Okay, since we have asked not one question that we prepared today.
I think you've asked a few of them.
Oh,
Like I think you asked a couple.
okay. Oh my goodness. So yeah, I want to talk a little bit about kind of strategic planning and that process. You kind of teased a little bit of some of these from a regional perspective or different ideas, and we have listeners that are have been charged to do it themselves, come up with your organization or your community strategic plan. And then we've got others that are, going to be kind of fortunate enough to have the budget to be able to hire someone like us to help them with this. But can you talk to me a little bit about the process that you go through when you're working with a new community or a new project?
Yeah, sure. And I've been on the different sides of that kind of thing, doing the internal sort of self-done piece as well. So can relate. And it's funny, like when I just mentioned that when I talk to clients, it's almost always in the conversation I say something like, or potential clients, I should say, I say, now, the first thing is, do you actually need a consultant? Because I had a bias against hiring consultants as an operating executive because they're more expensive usually, and per hour, right? And so you want to you just make sure your clients, because the end result you want is that good relationship where they feel they got a lot more value than they paid. And so so strategic planning is an example of this. Maybe an organization does have some capacity to do it internally, and that's wonderful if they can kind of do that in a way that works and advances their work. Um, so I actually wrote about this idea of strategic planning. It's in an article on my website, alexdadok.com, just like my name, so it's there. But so I'll be sort of hitting some high points here. But strategic planning, I think, in principle, right? It sounds strategic. It's plan. Like this sounds like a hopeful, great exercise. And it really can be, right? Because we're reaffirming our values. We're taking some time to think ahead. We're maybe getting organized around. I mean, those are all, we're bringing in stakeholders potentially. I mean, there's all these great things about strategic planning. Those are wonderful. Um, and so there's sort of two buckets with strategic planning then. One is that even with all those good things, there can still be some pitfalls with the actual planning process itself. And I'll mention those in a moment. But the actual bigger problem that is just you have to mention when you talk about strategic planning is you mentioned implementation earlier, and that's the sort of the premise of my practice is in a sense is operator who's hasn't been a consultant for a long time, but who thinks he has a thing or two to offer, being in the midst of organizations in both the nonprofit and the for-profit private sector, um, and working a lot with local governments and working in government as well. So that implementation piece is, without it, as we know, and as your listeners will know, strategic plans are a document that can sometimes be sent to funders and often can spend some quality time on a shelf somewhere. And that's good. I mean, the shelf needs some company. Maybe they're like energies are together or something like that. I don't know, but but there's a higher and better use oftentimes for this document. So on the planning side, then we talked a little bit about assumptions earlier. So that's a big pitfall with, and again, I mentioned some positive things. So I'm not like all negative, but we're just talking about the pitfalls now. So the unstated assumptions. So the organization says we're going to do a strategic plan, but actually, when the conversation gets into it, we find the organizations using as a basis of what they sort of did last year or recently. And that's good. You should be informed by what we've been doing recently, right? But there oftentimes are assumptions that that's what we will do in the future. And it makes sense because people's job functions may be invested in these things and comfort levels and the machinery of the organization, right? And so, but that's something to think about is, are we making unstated assumptions, and to really try to dig into those. That's one nice thing about going to law school, actually, is that law is all about questioning assumptions. So you really learn how to you just have that on, because that's sort of the one of the keys to being a good lawyer is to sort of think about underneath the assumption and think in ways that other people, perhaps the other side, isn't thinking about.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. I think in a previous podcast we talked about, with a previous guest, we talked about this idea of strategic doing instead of strategic planning, and a little bit of the not having the plan sit on the shelf and keep your other plans company, but instead it's an action, it's a work plan. But then some people, yes, refer to their strategic plan as really more of a work plan and nothing strategic and forward thinking and more than 1 year outlook. stuff like that, because it's the way we've always done it. So it's
Yeah.
different perspectives.
Yeah. And so the other two there, I don't wonder what you think about these, but the other one is sort of vagueness, right? So the plan is just like, we're going to build a strong community and like, we're going to, and it's like, and honestly, no matter how good they are, they kind of have a lot of similarities between strategic plans. So that's why the implementation is so, but to the extent possible, making it a little less vague is often a good thing. And there's a balance there, but you've probably seen some of these. And then the third is just this idea of the strategic plan, in a replacement for action. So the action is, we did a strategic plan, we had a convening, we did this study, right? That we did this thing.
Now what? Yeah.
Well,
so
and
what? Yes. Yes, you're right. That is the first step, or a step that you can check off, but good golly, yes, it should be more than that. You should be ready to do something with it. I like that. As a not using it as a replacement for action, just the fact that we created a document.
yeah, yeah. But if I may, I think just spending a moment on the implementation is where, I know your question was about strategic planning, but I think spending just a moment on the implementation is I'm always a booster for that. Um, so the implementation, like those things we just talked about, Sandy, I don't know about you, but I feel like they're like somewhat easier to like address. Like, okay, we're gonna look at our assumptions some. Like, we're gonna not make it too vague, and we understand that this is supposed to be a part one. And a leader can kind of like wrap their. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
That sounds pretty doable, right? With clients that you're working with, I mean, like they can do that. But then, what if the strategic plan says that they're going to do something really different and grow as an organization? Well, all of a sudden we're talking about new resources. We're talking about reprioritization of existing functions and resources. We're talking about people's job functions potentially changing. We're talking about difficult conversations. We're talking about organizational things that have to be done. And that gets, I think, really, really difficult for a lot of leaders, understandably so. And so I have a lot of empathy for, and having been in the position, and so, but I think that so there's a lot more that could be said about that. But I think that implementation piece, are we willing to have the conversation about how the budget connects to the strategic plan, the annual budget? What does that look like? Because budget decisions are policy and moral decisions about the way we're prioritizing our time and our mission, right? And the staff, that the way we allocate their function in the organization. And that gets real hard real quick, but it is the thing that can take the organization to the next level and unlock its potential.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, that budget piece, if the dollars are invested, if the dollars are allocated, then it becomes a priority. And that is either in staff role, or um, you know, necessary startup costs or marketing dollars or something to communicate this out. Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. I could go down a little rabbit hole, but
Yeah, there's a lot to say.
I know.
A lot to say about it. And sometimes
Yeah,
it's raising more
yeah,
money for the organization and
yeah,
needing to do that, which is also hard. And every
yeah.
organization wishes they could figure it out. And I'm sure you and I wish we could figure it out for them, but it's hard. So
Mhm. Yeah, and I mean, we see a lot of organizations that are obviously in that city or county government. So they've received this set amount of funding. They have this, certain number of staff people, and these are the job titles, and this is what they're expected to do, and these are the pay ranges, and all of these things. And that is a framework, but getting people to think of their role as within an opportunity to do something, do it a little differently. Shuffle the deck a little bit differently. Maybe you um, reallocate things, you merge positions, you create new positions, you abolish old, positions that just aren't working, and making sure that you have the right people in the right seat is
Yep.
critical. But again, little rabbit holes that we could go down all day long. So I want to be respectful of your time and the time of our listeners that are here, and remind our listeners that they can submit a question either via email or a voice memo on the EDO Breakthrough podcast website. And then we can, kind of tackle those questions in the future. So I would encourage our listeners to make sure that they are submitting any question, thoughts, and ideas that they have. But as we kind of wrap up, I'm looking for, curious what kind of goals you have that you're looking to achieve. Big, small, aspirational dream things. Anything you'd like to share with us today?
Well, thank you. And again, thank you, Sandy, for having me. I've really enjoyed the conversation. And, this podcast, I was just thinking here is an example of you making the capacity for yourself to do this, to have these conversations, to be curious about others and what's going on. And hopefully it's going to bring new relationships for your business as the word is getting out there, because you're taking the time to do it, right? I mean, I should do it, I guess, but I'm not taking the time to do it. You are. So, you're putting your money where your mouth is, in a sense. I mean, you're saying I'm gonna do this. So it's great.
Thank you.
And it's really been a great conversation too. So, to answer your question though, I mentioned about being useful in the world to my clients. And I as I think about kind of goals there. So what does that mean? My career thus far, and you heard, part of the story there earlier, and your listeners did, has been focused around kind of trying to figure out these tough questions, right? So in school, I studied economic development, and I literally studied industrial policy, like how do small businesses that have barriers, how can they grow and employ more people? It's like economic development, like 101 stuff. Industrial policy was so out of favor in the early 2000s, and it's really had a renaissance, since. And I was an advocate for it. And of course, I was a student, basically. Nobody was listening. But, it feels good to be on the side where things turned out the way you thought. And so then another thing, looking at in Peru, let's say you knew what good economic development policy was. How do you get that policy implemented, for example, in a local government setting? How do you actually decide to invest in the right things for your community? If we knew what they were, could that happen? What are the messy organizational political pieces? And that's what that research was about. Really messy stuff, in-depth budget analysis, in-depth interviews, longitudinal surveys to sort of like attack this problem from different sides, right? And so my career has been around those kinds of questions, around economic development, and then around, and policy, and this last piece of organizational work that I'm working on today is this consulting practice, right? Is okay. You need good ideas and helping businesses and communities grow. There's these political sort of bringing people together things that have to happen, and that's part of my practice. But then what about these actors that are actually the agents who are going to do these organizations, right? Whether it's the Chamber of Commerce or a local university or even a local government or community foundation who are going to pull these people together, economic development agency or association or administration, right? Whoever they may be, figuring that out, they are going to be the ones to affect all those other things that I've worked on in my career. So in a sense, what I'm hoping to do with this practice is to come home to the core of what actually matters in this work that my life has been about trying to figure out, what are we doing in society? How are we trying to make things better? And I think when we do that, if you and I, Sandy, do our work well, we in our little way are contributing to the promise of this country, of a place, of a land of opportunity, right? Of a place of prosperity and of of people able to live beautiful, good lives, right? And that, feeling like you're working towards that in your way and making a living doing it, what a privilege. That feels like a good goal. My practice is new. And so my goal is to see, can I do that? And can I be in service in that way? And can I make enough money to live while I'm doing it, right? So I can keep doing it.
Mm-hmm.
That's real. But realizing our promise in our way, because we all are only going to live one time, and there's many ways we make contributions in the world, but this feels like a way that I would like to.
That's beautiful, Alex. Thank you. I honestly, I just want to end with those words. I want to let those soak in a little bit. And, it's beautiful. I appreciate your passion and your commitment to this work and, the communities that we have the privilege of helping, and ultimately the residents, this generation and future, that may ultimately be able to benefit, in some small way by the work that we, can support. So, thank you. Thank you for joining, me today in this conversation.
Thank you very much for being such a gracious host, and again for your curiosity and energy that you're bringing through this podcast and through your work. It's been great to be with you, Sandy.
The EDO Breakthrough podcast is brought to you by PPR Strategies. PPR Strategies, standing for People and Places Reimagined, is a strategic consulting firm working specifically with EDOs and other place-based organizations. We share the unique stories of communities through communication, strategic planning, marketing, media relations, and more. Visit us at pprstrategies.com and find our contact information in the show notes. I'd like to give a big thank you to you for listening. Remember, together we are unstoppable.